allocating $80,000 in funds to immediately repair Building 167 at the Mare Island Preserve. The recommendation is to consider the allocation of $80,000 immediately needed to fund emergency temporary repairs to the buildings in order to allow ongoing programming by Mare Island Historical Trust volunteers who have access to and allow the public to have access to buildings that are in serious need of repairs, or alternatively, to allow the billing official to yellow tag and then red tag the affected buildings.
Okay, and who's presenting? Sir. Mr. Acting City Manager.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mayor and Council, with me tonight for this item I have Vincent Sprody. He's the Fire Prevention Division Chief. Our Building Inspection Manager, Sergio, is ill today, so he couldn't join us, but certainly between Vincent and I, we'll provide some background on this item, some history, and then also what some options in terms of what some recommendations are for the building. So just by way of some background on this item, this council talked about the Mare Island Preserve in this forum about a month ago. In a very lively discussion. Certainly lots of folks from the community came out to speak about that, and so I want to acknowledge that, and certainly those conversations staff has been engaged with the volunteers from the preserve throughout this process, and recently as we've talked about these particular buildings as well, and I think those conversations have been fruitful to get us to where we are. We still got some challenges. So with that acknowledgement, just want to talk about, and I have a little visual up, no presentation specifically, but just want to talk about what buildings we're talking about tonight. So these buildings on South Mare Island that are operated by volunteers from the Mare Island Heritage Trust. And those folks have been operating and doing program on the preserve for several years. And it's recently that we've had these conversations specifically about two buildings that are operated out at the trust. So if you see where that dot is there, that green dot that says Mare Island Preserve, that is building, what I'll refer to throughout the night, is building 167. That's the old Navy naming convention for the building. There's an identical structure that the volunteers from the trust also operate out of, which is building 168. But really for tonight, we're going to focus our conversation primarily on building 167, and that's because building 167 is currently operated by the volunteers as an informal welcome center. So that building in particular is where the preserve activities, a variety of programming is conducted, and it's essentially where the volunteers have public gatherings. So in terms of building code issues and life and fire safety issues, that's going to be our focus today. I'll talk a little bit about building 168 as well. So that building 167, just to give some context, because we hadn't talked a lot about the specifics of the building, but it's a 1934 building. It's a concrete structure. It's about 5,000 square feet. So big building, concrete walls, concrete and iron. It was, used in the 30s and throughout World War II for ammunition storage. So that's the history of the building. So a big, large, open concrete building. No other real significant improvements to the structure in terms of the interior have been made in terms of its current use. So that's, again, just some context. For the last about 2 or 3 years, city staff have been directly working with the volunteers to kind of make some minor improvements to the building and to support the use of that facility and this preserve in general in terms of its public use as really a open facility. Minor progress was made, but certainly in terms of the necessary building code, life safety issues in terms of the investments that would typically be made in a park facility or a building used in that capacity for public gatherings, no real significant improvements were made. So some of the prerequisite work was done, and Vince can talk about a little bit of that because he worked closely on that. So as we talk about specifics, there was some stuff done, but not really to the full extent of what was necessary to issue a certificate of occupancy. So, in fairness, because I wanted to talk about the history, so in fairness, the building is 1930s era, certainly has tremendous historical value to Vallejo, to the island, so I want to acknowledge that. And many of the volunteers have been very adamant about making sure that the city took that into account in terms of looking at the building code standards that should be applied in terms of making any improvements. And so for the most part, the life and building code issues, so life safety issues and fire code issues I'm going to talk about, we're assuming that it really qualifies as a historic building. So there's a different set of standards that would be applicable, but certainly a lot of the things that need to be done really supersede any kind of historic building code issues. These are really just the basic things that would need to be done to access the facility. So recent inspections have been completed, so both fire and our building official have done recent inspections, and they pointed out a whole host of issues. Again, those issues are not necessarily new because volunteers have been in this facility for years, but it did shine a different light in terms of some immediate issues that were brought to our attention, and certainly staff wanted to do the responsible thing in terms of looking at the liability that was posed there to look at some options to address those immediate issues. In August, so last month, I had a structural engineer go out and do an assessment. That's the first structural assessment, to my knowledge, that we've completed. And the good news was that the structural engineer said the building is robust, as we might think for a building that stored ammunition. It was built really well. So it's a concrete and iron structure and steel structure, so it's robust. So the building is standing in fairly good shape in terms of the structure. The difference becomes, or the concern becomes, its use. So it's in really good shape for an ammunition depot, not so much for a place where we would have public gatherings. And so certainly from some hazardous materials perspective, there's some transite material in the roof that we haven't tested but is suspected to maybe have some asbestos. We'd have to do some further testing. And certainly for long-term investment, seismic upgrades may be necessary to really transition its use. So there's some additional investments long-term that we would need to make. What we're proposing tonight, or what we're asking council to consider, is really this $80,000 number that's before you. Those are these immediate, today investment that we would need to make in order to use the facility with the temporary occupancy permit. So that temporary occupancy permit would essentially right now carry us through the end of the year. Those investments would be things like ingress, egress, so in and out of the building, some lighting improvements, fire safety improvements, exit signs, fire extinguishers, electrical improvements. Right now there's no permanent electricity in the facility. And then some other things in terms of access, the access ramps, handrails, etc. So after staff went out and did the assessment and the structural engineer completed his assessment, I had a contractor go out and give me some estimates. So that's the number that we have. So they've looked at these various lists of items and given me some cost estimates in terms of what it would take to address those items right away. And again, that's a temporary investment. I want to be clear about that. That really allows us to operate in the current capacity through the end of the year. Beyond that, if we start talking about issuing a permanent certificate of occupancy, like we would for any city facility, that's where this hazard materials assessment and abatement, seismic, other ADA accessibility, we'd have to look at, getting sewer to the building, other electrical improvements. So that's a bigger ticket item. I've given you an early estimate of about between $290,000 to $400,000. Just for context, typically a seismic upgrade, runs $50 to $100 per square foot. So that's just a very ballpark estimate as a start. It could be less. Certainly after we go in and do an assessment, we'd have to have an engineer go do that. It's just something for you to consider, again, as the start of the conversation. Alternatively, if council decides not to fund any short-term improvements, right now the building, another course of action would be for the building official to yellow tag and then ultimately red tag the facility. So yellow tag meaning we would allow the volunteers to go and get the material that they have. so they can access the facility to either do repairs or to get their material out. And then ultimately that would turn into a red tag where we would say you can no longer access the facility until such time adequate repairs were made. So by no means is this a facility, a lot of times people hear red tag and they think it's going to collapse. It's not. It's a robust structure, but it just doesn't meet any of our standards in terms of getting a certificate of occupancy, which is what our building department and fire department do every day. So that's just the background. Those are kind of the decisions in front of the council, and certainly Vince and I are here to answer questions about what we've been doing and next steps.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Before I take comments from council, I have 5 cards. We'll begin with Seamus Thornton, followed by Daniel Boone, followed by Patricia Gatz, followed by Myrna Hayes, and ending with Clifford Johnson. You have 3 minutes to make a statement.
Hello, my name is Seamus Thornton. I'm a resident of Vallejo for the past 18 years. Thank you, Mayor and City Council, for allowing me to speak. I think of the Preserve as a venue that attracts a lot of people to Vallejo. I recently read that a fellow Solano County resident said that they sleep in Benicia, but they live in Vallejo. And they cited the Preserve as one of the places where they come. They do osprey bird watching. I attended the Women's March there at the Preserve. I'd like to see the Building 167 maintained as a visitor center and brought up to code, and do what we have to do to make it serve that function. It's a neat building. It stays cool in the summer. When you walk in and somebody explains to you that it was an ammunition depot, that when the ammunition, the building is designed such that if the ammunition explodes, it blows off the roof. It doesn't go out the sides because the walls are so thick. It has a certain cachet to it. It has a certain Vallejo-ness to it. I think about the Empress Theater and how we invested in that venue, and how I never regret that. I'm at the Empress Theater 2 or 3 times a week going to shows, and I have to turn down more than I would care to, but I think that the Preserve is, we should invest in it just the way we invested in the Empress. And I really appreciate the Mare Island Historical Trust, because all those volunteers do a fabulous job of organizing events out there that I attend as many of that I can. I also enjoy taking my dog out there and mingling with other people and promoting Vallejo to people who are just visiting. So that's what I would like to see that building improved and invested in just the way we invested in the Empress. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Daniel Boone.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and honorable council members. The Mare Island Preserve is a tremendous asset to our city, and kind of rewinding back to where we began tonight, our mayor was talking about the Vallejo Waterfront Festival being a place, and that event being something that brings people together. It's not about dividing our community. Well, the Mare Island Preserve does exactly the same thing. It brings people together. Every time I've been out there, there are people walking or biking, enjoying the Preserve. Every time I have been out there, I have encountered at least one person, often many people, from outside of Vallejo who have traveled from outside our city specifically to come to the Mare Island Preserve, because it is such a beautiful place and there's so much history out there. And the Preserve, because this building 167, as Terrence mentioned, it has history, it has cachet to it. When you walk into that building, it is something special because it belongs to history, and you feel that when you're there. And people come to experience that and experience all the wonders of the Preserve. Now, I think it's also important to remember that the general plan that was prepared by the community, a community effort that took 5 years, the Mare Island Preserve is addressed in the general plan. And on page 3-24 as action CP-3.5C. The city is to, and this is your great general plan, propel Vallejo to 2040. So the city has already basically said, we want the Mare Island Preserve to be part of our future and part of where we're headed to 2040. And it says the city is going to formalize an arrangement for managing and operating the Mare Island Shoreline Heritage Preserve. Well, that means that the city wants the preserve to continue, and this investment of $80,000 is so little in the long term. The preserve has been operating, I understand it, for about 11 years on basically a wing and a prayer and a shoestring, and has developed all this wonderful programming for our community. So $80,000 catching up for 11 years of really has not cost the city anything is almost nothing to keep this wonderful thing going. I'd also like to point out the city owns the building, so if you don't invest the $80,000 now and you start yellow tagging or red tagging, the city is yellow tagging or red tagging itself. And why would you do that? I urge you to invest the money. It's a wise investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Patricia Gatz, followed by Myrna Hayes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Sampayan and City Council members. I urge you to allocate the $80,000. I think it's certainly a wise thing to do, and certainly far better than yellow tagging and red tagging that building. I think we owe a lot to Myrna Hayes and the volunteers who worked so long to create a really unique experience when you go over to the Mare Island Preserve and walk up the path to the ghost ship and look at the amazing expanse down the Carquina Strait, across San Pablo Bay, across into the waters as you're going towards San Francisco. And I also want to say a thanks to Myrna for the Flyway Festival. The last 16 years, having the annual Flyway Festival has been a very positive event for Vallejo. And to thank her for the daffodil teas that raised funds for improvements at St. Peter's Chapel. If their money is an issue to fund not only the $80,000, but ongoing repairs and things that are needed out there, I know there must be grants. Maybe there's grants through the San Francisco Bay program that now has money through various propositions that were passed. But I think to continue to support the Mare Island Preserve is going to be an important thing for the City Council to do. And we have enough negative press. This will give us positive press. Thank you.
Thank you. Myrna Hayes, followed by Clifford Johnson. And ending with Tom Aradonch.
Good evening, Mayor Sampayan and council members. My name is Myrna Hayes. We've all met. I was appointed by a mayor in 2003, along with 34 other people, to, as he said, see if we could make that park pencil out. 4 years later, we gave a presentation to council submitting a document, a 100-page document that showed the city just how we would do that and how we would make those recommendations. That by then was a new mayor. That mayor appointed another committee, and we made an additional report. I was the co-chair of that report, and one of our board members was the project manager for the company that the city hired to help us formalize that report. So our first event in that building in 167 was February of 2007 in collaboration with the City of Vallejo, U.S. Navy, and their contractor Weston Solutions. We had 200 people out. They had cake and refreshments following tours and outings for the first time in 150 years. KTVU came out. It was a very exciting moment in time. Fast forward to today, where a man named Bill George, who's a regular visitor to our preserve, worked in the shipyard for 34 years, born and raised here in Vallejo, now lives in Fairfield, called me out to his home where he offered me room by room whatever I wanted of his late 91-year-old mother's belongings, if they could somehow be a benefit to our preserve. He didn't ask for a receipt, and he didn't say what I could or couldn't have, but one thing he really wanted us to have was his mother's hand-knit Afghans. I have a dozen of them in my car. Why? Because he recognizes that the holiday tea that we hold every year in 167 is super chilly for older ladies, and he wants them to be warmer in memory of his mother. This is the kind of really personal investment our regional community is making in our preserve, but specifically in Building 167. As others have said, it absolutely does blow your mind as you walk in, even me, and say, where am I? What is this place? And it's very important to be able to say what this place is, because the city has an ongoing responsibility on about 3,800 acres of Mare Island to educate the public about the risk of exposure to munitions. So I'd like to ask for your support for this emergency funding. I believe that we could work closely with the Public Works Director to refine some of the costs that he mentioned that might not be as much as he said they are, as we begin to evaluate the building in terms of the historic building code. Just using one example. Using it as a museum is...
Ms. Hayes, thank you.
You're welcome. Would save you a lot of money. You don't need the earthquake retrofit, likely. Thank you.
Clifford Johnson.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I'm a user of what is an absolute gem in this city, Mare Island Preserve. It's just a delightful gem. One goes down, whenever I have visitors, and I do have quite a few during the year, come out to Vallejo, we always go out there and they always fall in love with the place. It's a wonderful walk up the hill, and most important of all is the Preserve Museum is just a unique place, and it's more than just a place, it's a community. When one goes there, there's always a few people there, always very welcoming and very educational as to what's involved. So to me it's an absolute gem, and it would be foolish to do anything to diminish it. And I think it's important to realize that it's a community as well as a beautiful environment, and if the place were to be yellow and then red tagged, that would be very disruptive to the community atmosphere. You don't know what that disruption would do, and I think it's important to preserve the community aspect in a continuous sense, so that I would very much be against letting it fall into a state where it really isn't preserved. The very name itself, preserve, indicates what I think you should do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Tom Hardonch?
Yes, I wasn't planning on talking tonight, and yet what I saw, what just happened, is something that's deeply disturbing to me, and Terrence, particularly to staff, is, I think Pippin was kind enough to share a document that showed that in 2010, San Francisco got $1,203 per resident in foundation money. Vallejo got $3. We typically get 1/20th of what Alameda gets, 1/5 of what Conocausta does. And I'll tell you, there's many, many reasons for this, but I'll tell you one of the main reasons. This really infuriates me, is the way that nonprofits are treated by our city government, and specifically the volunteers. As you know, I've been working on this issue to try and find a more positive solution, but these folks didn't even know until last moment that you were springing this on them. This was not a public announcement about what's happening, and there's 50 ways to skin this cat. Other communities have done it, and to just go by the book on something like this and to really do this to volunteers one more time is infuriating to me. And it's a very serious problem in our thing, and the reason we're not getting this money, millions of dollars to serve our citizens, is largely due to ignorance and problems within city staff over the time. And I'm going to just call it straight out. I'll be talking about this more at another time. But this should be tabled, should be studied more properly. The need for $80,000 immediately, and the idea that this building needs hundreds of thousands of dollars repairs without looking at other solutions, I think is reprehensible. And so I'm going to put it out very, very strongly. I feel very strongly emotionally about the way volunteers and the way nonprofits are treated in this city, and it starts today with the way that Myrna Hayes and her organization's been done. That's my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, comments, questions from council. I'm going to begin with some of my comments. First and foremost, I appreciate what is being done out at the preserve. And it is not, and I want to make this very clear, it is not the city's intent on closing this down. The city manager has made that very clear. He has said it time and time and time again. And it is an asset to our community, and I truly believe it is an asset to our community. But there are steps we need to take to get to that point. I want us to invest in that preserve, as do many, many residents in this community. I just went on the website and I was looking at the different pictures that have been taken of the preserve. And I've been out there hiking with my grandkids, and it is a wonderful place to visit. It is a wonderful, wonderful place to view a different part of Vallejo. At Visions of the Wild, a gentleman spoke about And Beauty for All, and it's about exploring the beauty that's around you, and that is exactly what I see in this preserve, the beauty around us. And it's something I definitely want to preserve. Spoke of the general plan, a speaker did, and yes, that is important that we do follow that, the 2040 plan, on making sure that the preserve is kept alive and is kept well. The Public Works Director spoke of the certificate of occupancy. I've got to agree with that. That is something that is important to any facility within the city of Vallejo. There's certain codes that have to be met. There's certain requirements that have to be met, or we are held liable should somebody get hurt, should something happen, and that could be absolutely detrimental to our finances. So I definitely agree with the certificate of occupancy, and that's something we need to pursue. There's the funding. I agree that we've got to be able to search for funding. Right now we're stop-gapping this with $80,000, if that is what council's pleasure is tonight, to repair this, at least make it workable temporarily. And what I want to do is I want to agendize speaking, just talking specifically about the Mare Island Preserve and what should be done to make it a showcase for our community, and the direction, the steps we need to take to get there. It has been there for quite a few years. I believe it was Marion Tintley that spoke with Ms. Hayes to to make it happen. And Myrna has worked diligently, along with her volunteers, to keep it going. I want to see it keep going. I don't want it to go away. I don't think there's any member of this council that wants to see it go away. But we have to take the right steps in moving this forward. We have to be able to say, okay, these are the requirements, this is what we're going to have to do, this is where we're going to go for funding, but we got to do it right. I've got a whole raft of concerns, beginning with fire. If we had a fire up there, we don't have roads wide enough to get fire vehicles up there. There's a lot of dry brush, and we're allowing campfires up there. We're allowing people to camp. Do we have bathroom facilities for them? Do we have trash facilities? So the list goes on and on and on, and that's why my hope is that we can agendize this in the near future to talk specifically about what we need to do to make this workable for not just the city of Vallejo, but the visitors that go up there and enjoy the property. So with that, those are my comments. Do we have any other comments from council? Councilmember Magapa.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some questions to the panel. What does $80,000 actually buy for us?
What's proposed is to have the handrails installed, the guardrails, panic hardware on the exit doors, possibly a fire alarm system. Those things have to be bid out. Permanent power to the building. It requires permanent power. Some history on the permanent power. Mare Island Energy has installed a 200-amp panel at their transformer across the street, so it just has to be pulled across to the building. Interior lighting, permanent lighting, emergency lighting. Let's see what else is on this list here.
And none of those exist today?
The exit signs do. She does have some fire extinguishers out there, but minimal items that comply with the code have been installed. I've covered those items. The big thing is in the state fire and building codes, it was previously a storage building, and this is a change in use. So this change in use to an assembly occupancy requires these things that Terrence has gone over.
The fire extinguishers even tested?
Yes, those are
no. So $80,000 will make it relatively safe?
Yes, temporarily till the end of the year is what Terrence is proposing.
So, Councilmember, I want to clarify. So those are to address what we're calling really fire and life safety issues. So that's the fire extinguishers, the lighting, some access issues, handrails, etc. To get a final certificate of occupancy will be more of an investment, certainly. So,
yeah. So if we don't go take additional actions, the $80,000 is a sunk cost.
So some of those costs in the $80,000, if we invest in the building in the future, we'll recapture those investments. So they're not entirely sunk, but certainly if we don't commit to a long-term investment, we won't be able to realize those costs.
Right, I understand. Are we going to do any hazard abatement at all? I don't know what's in the building, but
so at a minimum, we will do a investigation. So right now, based on a preliminary structural assessment, who had, by an engineer who has a lot of experience, he made a visual assessment and said we need to take further action. So it's likely that there's material that we would need to abate in the ceiling tiles.
like air monitoring at all going on in there?
Not presently.
Okay. If we invest probably more of a question for, I don't know who to ask the question, but if we invest further into the building, does it have potential to generate revenue to at least make it sustainable and even just to break even?
So another important thing to note is that currently the city does not have an agreement with the volunteers.
Okay.
So in order for us to really realize any revenue, that'd be a prerequisite. So we'd have to do that. Once we had an agreement, a lease agreement, or some operations agreement, certainly there's opportunities to get revenue.
Okay. So if we invest the 80,000 and don't do anything else, how long before we have to red tag the building?
At present, that $80,000 is for temporary occupancy through the end of the year, calendar year. So we'd be revisiting, re-inspecting, and we'd essentially, first of the year, be kind of right back here.
So about 90 days.
Correct.
If you were to assign levels of abatement or ways to make the building safe, if 80,000 is level 1, what is the next level and how much is that?
So I would say if 80,000 is our kind of our baseline,
Yeah.
certainly when we talk about a public facility, we would, the next increment is in that $300,000 range. And I say that because we're talking about ADA issues, we're talking about restroom facilities potentially. I think it's really a decision at that point, do we want a really
Right.
world-class facility, and we'd have to invest in that.
It'll probably be a whole nother agenda item to get into that dialogue.
Correct.
Mr. Mayor, those are all my questions at the moment.
Okay, thank you. What I'm going to do is just go down the line. Councilmember McConnell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've been working on this subcommittee of one, me, and the city manager. The overall intent and desire, as I understand the city manager to have expressed it, which you, Mayor Sampayan, have articulated as well, is to keep this Mare Island Preserve functioning. I believe that is consistent with our economic development plan, which among other things calls for recreation and tourism as one of the pillars of our economic development system. Last night I saw 3 of my colleagues attempt to field a question of, is Vallejo family friendly? And that was a struggle for them. If you have listened to the speakers who have come before you, they have articulated how desirable of an activity is being done there. This is one of the very few activities in this city that is truly family friendly. So if you are interested in preserving family friendliness activities, then this becomes almost a no-brainer despite the cost. The $80,000 is an insignificant amount compared to what we gain out of the building because the improvements will remain with that building. It's our building. But if they are not made, the Mare Island Preserve will not only cease to exist, but so will the Flyaway Festival and all of the goodwill that has been brought to this city. I don't want to go down that route. I think that this city does so little to help family-friendly activities, particularly for children, that this would be an abhorrent offense to that goal. It's part of the historical significance of the city of Vallejo and the Mare Island Naval Shipyard as it moved into the Western Pacific and developed 132 years of history of United States Western expansion into the Pacific. The Mare Island Preserve seeks to preserve that activity. And if we turn our back on them, we turn our back on our very identity of what this city is. We ignore it, and we completely insult our heritage. What I would propose is that we allocate the $80,000 as requested tonight, that we instruct staff to return to us in March or April, along with a comprehensive plan as to how to fund the needed repairs, over what period of time it can be done, to cooperate with and enter into good faith, in the legal sense of that word, negotiations with the Mare Island Preserve to determine whether or not they can also do fundraising. Because as Mr. Ariadanch made reference, Solano County is one of the poorest fundraising counties in the entire Bay Area for nonprofit involvement. And if we are going to change that, the battle begins here. So this is not just an $80,000 allocation. It is a question of values, it is a question of policy, and it's a question that I intend to pursue and support, as Mayor Sampayan has indicated. I am fully aware of the cost involved in this. Believe me, we can make that up in a lot of other ways. But I also believe that the Mare Island Preserve, with an agreement to operate, would then be in a position to do fundraising, as all of our nonprofits must do. We are beginning to see bequests going through some of the local legal offices where people are donating money to nonprofit activities here in the city of Vallejo. And the city of Vallejo benefits from that. There's a proposal to enhance the Rose Garden at Grant Mahoney Park. There are proposals coming in to assist the symphony. If we shut down this proposal, which a negative vote tonight will do, then we are cutting off our nose to fight our space. We are saying that families are insignificant, our history is not worth paying for, and we have nothing else to do but to exist to pay salaries and keep the roads repaired. As I said, that's abhorrent to me. So I ask that you support this proposal tonight. I ask that you support instructing the staff to do a comprehensive study of this situation so that over time we can make this work as it needs to do.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So this 80,000 will take us 90 days, so that means around Christmas time. So it sounds like we need action sooner than that to earthquake retrofit the building, sooner than the March and April that Councilmember McConnell mentioned.
Yes, certainly, I think we would, staff would come back before the March, April, so early in the year, in the calendar year, make some additional recommendations.
Okay.
So we'd have at least 90 days to make some assessments and come back.
Okay, but that probably wouldn't be the comprehensive. I do agree that there needs to be a comprehensive approach to the preserve. It kind of got abandoned by the city when the city went bankrupt, and now we've finally are able to turn our attention to it and make it truly the preserve it should be, which means just, I mean, really, I think there doesn't need to be that much investment because a lot of it is open space, but those old buildings, they do need work. And I would say tonight, if the council approves this 80,000, there is an underlying, an unspoken commitment they will continue to support the preserve, because why would we throw $80,000 into it if we weren't going to throw more money at it in the future?
or invest in it. So I guess the struggle I'm thinking about when we're looking at this is $80,000, and we're talking about fundraising, and if there were, because it's an emergency, I don't think there's an opportunity, and this is probably more for the finance department or the grant writing, there's not an opportunity to find matching funds, because when you start investing in your city or in your nonprofit, you have the opportunity to get matching funds, and so I'm hoping that will be considered when it comes back in the early part of the year, that we work with a grant writer to see if we can't get matching funds. That would be fantastic. I was just up there on Labor Day, and it's really, everybody in the city of Vallejo should go over there, and it just gives you a different perspective of our city. A lot of people sometimes are down on Vallejo, and this and that doesn't get done, and that doesn't get done. But when you're over there, you just look back at your city, and it's so beautiful. And then just being there, the history that's there, and the volunteers are doing a great job under Myrna's guidance. The Nightmare Island, which is so much fun, and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, I really hope that we look for matching funds. I think with the $80,000, it's exciting to have permanent power and interior lighting, so I'm hoping that people are happy that, well, if the council approves, and I'm going to support this. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Verderliga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question, just for clarification. So the Mare Island Historical Trust, is that a nonprofit, 501c3? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So who is the president of that nonprofit, or who are the members of the board of directors?
I can't.
Is it an active nonprofit? That's my question.
As far as we know, it is. I can't tell you who's on the board or who the president is.
Okay. So for purposes of operations and responsibility, are they over the preserve or no?
So what we have is an informal oral agreement. So there is no written document that gives anybody responsibility on it. What we have is kind of a day-to-day operations that volunteers run.
Okay. So do the members of the Mare Island Historical Trust coordinate with the volunteers that work on the preserve?
So I think some of the questions are probably best posed to Myrna, because we don't...
What is the relationship between the historic preserve, the preserve volunteers and the historical trust? Because I think I want to know what is the relationship between those two groups.
Myrna's not available.
Oh, okay. Who can speak to it?
Yes, go ahead and approach the podium.
What has been frustrating to me about this conversation is this deep lack of understanding of how nonprofits work and the lack of support. There was no consultation with Myrna's group about any of this happening. This evening was never announced to them. They came to just discover it. Now, these are mistakes we've made consistently over a lot of years. But, for instance, many of these problems, you talk about $80,000, that buys incredible temporary buildings, potentially. That might be another solution. We need a little more creativity in this town about how we approach this. And when you talk about, yes, they have an active board. When you talk about liability, I know from talking to City Attorney Katana, that's passed on to nonprofits all the time. VCAF takes on the liability issues for the city on many different projects, including the Capitol Stairs right now, including the Empress, including many other things.
Mr. Ardach, I'm going to cut you off.
Okay, I'm sorry,
I would like
yes,
to answer her question directly.
My specific answer is yes, they have a working board, they are a nonprofit. This could be set up in a responsible way to take away a lot of the liability.
So what I've heard and what I've seen, and what needs to happen is really a more, communication and operation, clarification of who's who and who's responsible for operations, who's responsible for, does the board even meet regularly, and a working relationship between the preserve volunteers, whom I really, is very thankful for the years that they have devoted to maintaining this preserve. I really, really appreciate their work. With that said, my concerns are safety, liability issues on part of the city, because this has been discussed, I believe, in the past, but there's really been, we haven't put meat in it. We haven't put any teeth in it. And again, who has the deep pockets if something happens there? The city gets sued. Millions of dollars. There have been, and I don't need for you to answer, Mr. Ardonch, there have been issues in the past with, lately, a lawsuit back in a city, which I forwarded to Ms. Quintana. A boy had hurt himself in a city-run park, and the city lost, millions of dollars. It only takes one accident for the city to be liable, and that's what I'm after, is city's liability. With that said, so the $80,000 for this building, I have no problems voting for it, okay? But my concern is I want to tag with that a document, an MOU, however you would call it, rules of how the volunteers run the preserve. And of the board, MIHT, the Historic Trust, what is really their role?
Councilman, I'm going to interrupt for just a quick second here. I've asked that this be agendized so we speak directly about where we're going to go with this, so we establish the rules, so we establish how we're going to make sure that this is operated in accordance to all the rules, regulations, and laws of this state. I want to make sure we're above board on that this is governed correctly. So we will be agendizing this, I hope in the very near future. I'm going to ask staff to look at this very carefully to see where we need to go to make this a reality so that this preserve stays open. I'm going to ask the city attorney for her legal comments regarding this to see what needs to be done, which would incorporate, Councilmember, what you're requesting, that all of this is done as we would do with any type of park, event, or otherwise that we have in this city. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but I thought that needed to be said.
Right.
And I think it's very clear the direction in which we're going to go.
And just this one more comment. The volunteers, the city knows, we have a list of those volunteers. Okay, so and those are details. And, we approved the $80,000, it will take us to December. So in the meantime, will the building be habitable? Again, the volunteers, are they going to be, is their safety going to be ensured? And, meaning, are they going to be safe to enter that building? Or anyone from the public freely just going to be able to go in there and do their thing? So it's the operational issues, rules, and of use. That does not exist. That's what concerns me.
Mr. Davis, can you respond to that?
Certainly. And just to be clear, it concerns staff as well, and that's partly why we're here.
Very serious.
So certainly, we've made efforts over time with the volunteers to work on various agreements. Those haven't been successful. We'll continue that effort. We'll bring that back to council, certainly, as you've made it clear. So do we have a list of all of the volunteers? We do not. And that's part of the challenge, and that's certainly, this has been an informal agreement. I think, by all accounts, it's been fairly successful, but it's been an informal agreement all this time, so certainly that's part of this effort, is to make sure that we can formalize that agreement to cover the liability of both city staff, but also the nonprofits and the volunteers as well. So we'll certainly do that. I want to point out, make one clarification, because I think it was mischaracterized. We've been communicating directly with the volunteers a lot. And so I don't want this to look like this was a surprise. I think these conversations have been ongoing. Vince has been working directly with Myrna for 2 or 3 years. So this is not new. These relationships have been established. I also want to say that we've proposed temporary buildings as well as an option, and that can be an option in the future. So even if we get to January and we find that we do need a huge investment, there is still another option to continue the activities at the preserve. So it's not always an all or nothing. So I think we'll continue to explore our options.
Okay, so, thank you. So, obviously, I would like, to get more detail on operations, what activities take place in that preserve, just for, again, that will all be included when you give us that report. And how soon can we get an agreement in place? Do we have to wait until spring? What is the timeline for those agreements? Because right now, everything is informal, and that is what worries me.
I wanted to speak to that because I think I've heard two different things, and I know that internally there have been lots of conversations about what the next step is, and I think it would be worthwhile to again have this discussion at a later date when Greg is here, because one approach is to move at all speed and sign a quick agreement with the current volunteers, or we can envision ways in which we can actually make the preserve open to the public and have a more formal process for who has that contract and where that contract leads to and what is the content. Because sometimes quickest is perhaps not the best. And so a more measured discussion about what are the activities, what are the next steps for that to safeguard the city's interests, and many of the things that Councilmember Verdeliga is raising is probably a good step, but we're probably not prepared to take a position on what the next steps are as of tonight.
Okay. I want to interrupt here for just a quick second. How soon do you think we can get this on the agenda?
I would say certainly give us, 75 days or so, we can bring that back. So, a couple months.
Okay, so we can have it probably before the end of the year, taking into account the holiday breaks.
Yes.
Okay.
So what are we-
I would like us to do that and address the concerns that have so far been raised by the council members that have spoken. Do you have anything else, council member?
So in 90 days by the end of the year?
Yeah.
We'll have something with 75 days.
75
They'll
days.
actually take us through the end of the year. No.
Yes.
This year agenda is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DuCosta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I first was exposed to the preserve through Leadership Vallejo. We had a day that we spent out at the preserve and hiking around there, and it's beautiful. And I've since taken all of my daughters there, and they all love it as well. Although Angelina best enjoyed it piggyback riding. It was too much of a hike for her, so I got extra workouts, so that was wonderful. I do echo the concerns of my colleague, Councilmember Verdeliga, so I'm glad to hear that it will be coming back to us soon. But I do think it's important to support this item tonight as an indication of our intent and desire to see this preserved.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Singa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You guys said everything, so I'll just shut up, I think. But I understand the risk is important, and also agree with Councilmember McConnell for his very eloquent speech, and I think that's important. Everyone in this council support the preserve, and I for one supported. I was in the council, I think, when Myrna first was given the task, and I can guarantee you she wasn't given any marching orders. She was just told to go there and do something. And that's important. And the fact that she did it and put it at the current level it is, that talks volume on how efficient Myrna is. So I appreciate that, Myrna. And this is a good start. I think we should move forward with this and allocate the 80,000, hoping that further fundraising activities will be looked into to raise more money for the this building. I think we have to go to, I don't know, Plenar can help, because they helped when they put out the Global Help Center. They spend all the money there so I don't know if that will work these days. And another thing that we can probably look at is see if the Rebuilding Together of Solano County can work with us on this one. They are pretty good in renovating government buildings, including the Veterans Memorial Center. They did everything on that center to make it livable. And I don't know if they've been contacted. I can contact them to see if they can still include this on their project. But nonetheless, I am all for this. Let's preserve the preserve. Okay, thank you.
Well said, thank you very much. And yes, if you don't mind contacting Solano Rebuilding Together. Yes, you are. So, Madam City Attorney, a matter of process here. I was just popped into my mind about maybe an ad hoc committee. When would be an appropriate time to put together an ad hoc committee to look at the issues, to work with Myrna and the volunteers?
Anytime that you want to tell the city manager to agendize the matter for creation of an ad hoc committee. So next regular council meeting is fine, just have a conversation with him.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick question. Just a real quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
For the city attorney. The certificate of occupancy does give us some cover in terms of liability, risk.
No, actually, it doesn't. It's just a method to kind of tell the person who is occupying or responsible for the building that these are the things that have been done so far, and this is kind of what you have left to do.
Yeah, I'm supporting this item, but I just want a clarification. Thank you.
You had another question?
One last question, Ms. Mayor. I know you suggested an ad hoc committee. Would members of that ad hoc committee include council members?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I was just asking.
Absolutely. Okay, what's the pleasure of council?
I would like to offer that we consider the allocation, or that we approve the allocation of $80,000 immediately needed to fund emergency temporary repairs to the buildings in order to allow ongoing programming by the Mare Island Historic Trust, volunteers who have access to, and allow the public to have access to the buildings that are in serious need of repairs. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you. And that being said, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. None heard. Motion passes. Thank you very much, council.